Welcome everyone. My name is Stellan Windhagen. I'm directing the Resistance Studies Initiative here at UMass Amherst. And I want to begin with some information, and then we will move over to the talk. Firstly, I circulate here a list for emails. If you're interested to know more about this type of activities that we're organizing at the Resistance Studies Initiative, please sign up here. This talk is the first in a series of 4 that we are having this fall, and I will circulate also this list of the talks that are coming up. We have with Kathleen Brown Perez about American Indians and their resistance, and Nusrat Chaudhry from Amherst College on resistance in Bangladesh, and Otto von Busch from New York, the New School, about hacking. Originally we were naming that talk How to Lockpick. So you get maybe an idea of what kind of things he will talk about. We also have a talk together with Stepik here at UMass with Joanne Sheehan on land struggles and the black farmers displayed in the movie The Arc of Justice, and how community land trust has been key for creating autonomy among black civil rights activists. That's coming up in October 24. And then lastly, we are collaborating with the Movement for Justice in El Barrio, Harlem, New York, with an activist workshop that is happening in Springfield that is built very much on the experience of the Zapatistas in the indigenous Zapatista movement in South Mexico, Chiapas, that work very hard with self-rule and autonomy. That's also the model of how this group of Latin Americans, Puerto Ricans, are fighting against gentrification in Harlem, and they're passing that on to activist groups in Springfield. So this is a free workshop for a whole day, so if you know activists that would benefit from that, please spread that. All right. Lastly, housekeeping. I have some propaganda from the Resistance Studies Initiative that you can pick up for free. This one is showing something of what we're doing and what we're aiming to do. And then there is a journal, actually a unique one that we started here, the Journal of Resistance Studies, that we need to get out to people all around to know and to subscribe in order to survive as a public access journal. So those are for free, but then please spread the knowledge about the journal that it exists. All right, that's that. Matt Meyer, welcome. So this is the formal beginning of Matt as our senior research scholar at the Resistance Studies Initiative. But he's been around with the Resistance Studies Initiative from the beginning, helping out and being instrumental for a lot of the activities we have done. Matt and I, we know each other since a long time as activists within the War Resisters International, more known here in the US as the War Resisters League, which is the American part of that international. Matt has been part of founding the Peace and Justice Studies Association here in the United States, Canada, that is actually gathering for discussing the topic of revolutionary nonviolence in Philadelphia in a couple of days. Matt is also a co-chair of the Fellowship of Reconciliation here in the US, and now also formally associated with us. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Matt, and to hear you talk about this topic. So for everyone to know, we are videotaping the talk. So if anyone has trouble with being in the videotape, you should know that the videotape is only showing Matt, but if you're sitting here closer, and don't want to be on a videotape, you could move over and sit over there behind for any reason. I think that's all, Debbie. Yeah. This is Debbie Weil, our office manager, the one that has all the knowledge and coordinates what we're doing in reality. There are some snacks over there as well. So, with all that, welcome.
Thank you. Where are we? Where are we? Where are we? I begin by asking this because we are living in an era in many ways defined by identity politics, by a socio-cultural moment which is centered around determining, sometimes in exacting terms, an answer to the question, who are we? Dangerous Professor George Yancey ponders the political outcomes of a time when a growing number of white folk are, quote, playing identity politics. He has also noted that the ideas connected to identity politics are built on a foundation where symbolic gestures are fundamental. From as far across the aisle as Yale University professors under investigation Amy Chua, a similar warning about the investigation and the behavior of whites in this period essentially accords the election of 45 to the divisions brought about by an era of identity. Though we'll come back a bit to identity and social change in a moment, this presentation begins with the premise that a more important question, a question in need of a more precise series of answers, is at hand. The question, where are we? Let me begin by reassuring you. We are on the campus of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the flagship campus of the Commonwealth. We're in room 145 of the Integrated Science Building, no separatism here, and refreshments will be served. So let me begin by thanking Stellan Vinthagen and my colleagues at the Resistance Studies Initiative, by thanking my dear colleague and friend Amilcar Shabazz, recent past chair of the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies and current president of the National Council of Black Studies, and thanking all of the faculty, staff, students, and workers here today. Now, I mentioned Dr. Shabazz's credentials not only because it is the duty of good friends to cheerlead for one another, but also because one vital answer to the question of where we are is located in literal shadow of the tallest academic research library in the world. The great W.E.B. Du Bois Library is, of course, named after arguably the greatest US-based thinker of the 20th century. But I still hear folks saying Web Du Bois, as if some spidery French figure could lay claim to that achievement. It was Du Bois who pioneered the modern field of sociology, Du Bois who helped found the longest continuous civil and human rights organization in U.S. history, Du Bois whose Pan-Africanism and internationalism puts him at the top of any list of global anti-imperialists, and Du Bois who famously stated, quote, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Now, that original Du Bois assertion was penned in his classic Souls of Black Folk, and his thunderous condemnation of the divisiveness and racism in contemporary society surely still has relevance today. But it is also important to note that decades later, and shortly before giving up on the US and moving to Ghana, Du Bois altered his thinking a bit. Quote, the race problem in which I was interested, he wrote shortly before his West African sojourn, cut across the lines of color and physique and belief and status, and was a matter of cultural patterns, perverted teachings, and human hate and prejudice, which reached all sorts of people and caused endless evil to all, close quote. In more ways than we can imagine, we are located in the shadow of Du Bois's intellectual curiosity, acumen, and analysis. Even deeper levels of the question, where are we, and the need for deeper answers can be found no further than looking at the seal of the university, based, of course, on the seal of the state. Is that indigenous person, that red man of days gone by, representing his people, proud founders of the state? Or is it much more accurate to state that we are here today, continuing to occupy, benefit from, live and work on stolen lands, in the case of tonight's location on the land of the Nipmuc and Pocumtuck peoples? Surely it is good that a slightly greater of non-Indian peoples are understanding the need to at least acknowledge that we are living on stolen land of others. It is even better when we also acknowledge that we, the settlers, have been very poor custodians and caretakers of the lands which we now claim to be our own. Better when young environmentalists begin to reclaim the land and make preservation and sustainability a priority. But a truly transformative approach would take steps several points forward. Indigenous peoples of this region and this state are not relics of the past, but are with us here today. They are survival, often in more creative than the social change movements of the rest of us. They struggle for recognition and rights, they struggle for land, and too often remain unsupported by allegedly progressive peoples. It is one thing to have to fight a battle for official federal recognition, but what does it say of our own justice and peace efforts when too often Native peoples have to struggle just to be recognized, just to be included or supported by us? We are on Nipmuc land. We are living, working, and profiting from our continued occupation of indigenous spaces. The question of where we are has implications beyond the local and regional. We've been trained to think of the USA as simply America, despite the outcry from our Southern American neighbors, and to think of America as a country filled with immigrants and diversity, with a melting pot of cultures and peoples united in a vision of democracy, or at least of capitalism and freedom of market. While many critical scholars and activists dispute aspects of this mythology, I would argue that we are still not precise enough, not clear enough or vocal enough of what it is the U.S. is, and therefore what it is we are up against in working for effective, long-lasting justice and social change. One doesn't have to focus simply on the native nations within the U.S. or on Puerto Rico, the largest colony still controlled by a foreign power, us. We don't have to go to Hawaii or Alaska, though there's much to learn from the struggles in those locations and the ways in which their colonial status was and is invisibilized, a forced incorporation carried out through military occupation, cultural genocide, super gentrification, and shady economic and political deals. The rights of immigrants are a leading concern of progressive peoples today, and the Mexico-U.S. border has become a particular point of militarized contention over the past 2 years especially. But Mexicans have a uniquely complex claim, as the northern third of their territory became part of the U.S. as part of war booty, in a conflict manufactured by the federal government as much as any made-up weapons of mass destruction of the current era. Manifest Destiny continues to this day when a white supremacist narrative of U.S. history suggests that the conflict resulting in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was based on Mexican aggression rather than U.S. expansionist desires. The fact that tens of thousands of Mexicans, content on their land for generations, woke up one morning to find that they were now on American territory, they were now Americans, is a neat magic trick. With a wave of a pen, we made land rights, language dominance, and human rights in general just disappear. Current talk of border walls, English only, and immigration issues must be seen in this larger historic context, or else we diminish our work in a no-win limited framework. The land from sea to shining sea is not the God-given right of white male property owners. And though this may seem like a simplistic understanding which we all have moved far beyond since 1776, in fact, too much of our discourse is still set in the context of these beliefs. Do we dare to engage with the black folk who assert that black lives not only matter, but that people of African descent, Americanized by conquest and opportunism as much as any colonized people, constitute a black nation forged in struggle? That nation, distinct from African nations or nations of the Americas, has a culture, politics, and a language base well deserving of formal recognition. What it doesn't have, from a formal or federalized perspective, is an internationally recognized land-based, articulated national, political, or economic powers. It's hardly the point whether one agrees with the revolutionary nationalist idea sprung from the teachings of El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, Minister Malcolm X, that Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, and South Carolina make up a Republic of New Africa, which deserves its own place among the nation states of the world. No, the point is that the Republic of New Africa cry to free the land echoes today far beyond a small circle, as growing number of disenfranchised and oppressed people understand that a few extra reformist rights will not satisfy the freedom needs of people still in chains. The point is that ignorance can no longer be an excuse on the part of white folk, men folk, rich folk, apparently well-educated folk in the richest, most linked-in place on the planet. Where we are, as surely at any point in the history of civilization, is an empire, one built by imprisoning not just individuals who dissent, not just individuals who represent in one form or another oppressed people who need to be contained, but entire nations of peoples, imprisoned through external colonialism, but also by a newer form of internal colonies whose status is erased by centuries of cultural assimilation and genocide. We are living in an empire, and any nonviolent or peace-loving politics must begin with this understanding and embody a staunchly anti-imperialist position. Without this, our nonviolent resistance, unwittingly or otherwise, supports the vast structural which strengthens the oppression we say we oppose. If we wonder why some question the preaching of pacifism from North American scholars and activists, we need look no further than that. Talk of peace and nonviolence without taking actions against the empire, actions in solidarity with and under the leadership of those colonized and oppressed by the systems that do more to support the status quo than to destroy it, this type of nonviolence is a cover for the continuation of the violence of empire. This type of peace, like any peace without justice, is doomed forever for failure and discord. Allow me to read a short section from this just-released book that has my name on it. This was actually based on an event we did some years ago with resistance studies here at Amherst. We must move beyond the myth about what the U.S. is and what it can be. It may be true that some reforms are both good and necessary in the struggles against racist police violence and mass incarceration. It may be true that we must fight the good fight to push back the vicious privatization of education, healthcare, and community services that make clear that the U.S. is not committed to democracy or justice for all. But it is surely also true that America is doing more than simply locking up people of African descent at a rate reminiscent of apartheid South Africa. America is doing more than warehousing political prisoners, especially from the Black Liberation Movement, Black Panthers, and others for 30, 40, 50-plus years of torture behind bars. If we understand that racism is a combination of prejudice plus power, and that power comes from concrete structural sources, most especially land and capital, then we must face the institutional realities of white supremacy well beyond interpersonal dynamics. It is clear that if we are to examine the history of the U.S. from before 1776 till today, from south to north and Hawaii to Puerto Rico, from occupied Mexico to what some call New Africa, if we are to look at the U.S. less as a nation and more as an empire and imperial power in deep economic decline, if we are to look sharply at the empire we live in, we cannot help but conclude that the United States of America is a prison house of nations. That is why it has been so hard to move beyond the historic calls for new ways to engage in struggle. That is why when the cry Black Lives Matter is proclaimed, so often we hear the confused retort, but don't all lives matter? To this we must simply and clearly say, America has always meant white lives matter most. From the genocidal policies of the Middle Passage and Manifest Destiny, America has always meant white lives matter most. From the days of Jim Crow lynching to the police Klan realities of blue cap by day, white hood by night, America has always meant white lives matter most. When we learn today that some prisons in the Deep South are being built at a rate directly proportional to the low test scores obtained in predominantly black public schools and standardized tests administered to third and fourth graders, we know that America still means white lives matter most. America has always meant white lives matter most. Emerging movements seem clear in part on who needs to be resisted and who needs to be supported, and now we're talked about the location of where we are. But a settler colonial analysis, such as the one put out in J. Sakai's Settlers, The Myth of the White Proletariat, is essential in understanding the what. What are we resisting? What is our resistance focused on? And 2 decades into the 21st century, my shock and sadness is not that Sakai's work is not more widely supported or followed. It is that, alongside historian Howard Zinn, whose People's History of the U.S. seems to grow more popular by the week, Sakai's analysis is not even known, not even considered by the top radical academics who profess to work for serious social change. Make no mistake about it, Zinn is good. Zinn plus Sakai is essential. And those two, plus a thoughtful updating of where the twists and turns of this century have taken us, is the best, the potential basis for actual meaningful work in this corner of our planet. But the abstract for this presentation promised to cover not only the who's, the where's, and the what's of our current situation, but also the how's. And this is where the burgeoning field of resistance studies is so crucial. What lessons of liberation have been collected over the past half century which can guide us and give us hope, not only for transformation in this already decaying empire, but across the globe? I will quickly cite 9 places to look as a beginning challenge and guidepost to what 21st century revolutionary nonviolence might look like. Time does not allow these to be detailed here, but each of these deserves full courses about the processes, products, and possibilities for transformation which build on the successes and failures of the last 50 years. 1. In India, we would do well to pay better attention to the post-Gandhi Gandhians, who understood that some of the deep economic, land, and ethnic racial caste issues at the heart of Indian injustice were just beginning to be touched on by the generation of Gandhi, Nehru, and others. Jayaprakash Narayan, Narayan Desai, and so many others worked for what they dared to call total revolution, a personalist political mix of individual and institutional social change, which also wasn't afraid to be in dialogue with the Maoists, Marxists, and other radicals who might not share all of their philosophical or tactical views, but were, like them, fighting for radical change for the benefit of the majority of the people. 2. In Mozambique, A sharp critique of militarism and military practice has begun to transform this icon of armed struggle beyond the myths of the past towards contemporary commitments to demilitarize the minds and lives, especially of the youth. That the champion spokesperson for the worldwide end to the practice of child soldiering is none other than Mozambican Graça Machel is no coincidence at all. 3. The decades-long bloody conflict in Western Sahara, which along with Puerto Rico has the distinction of being among the only direct colonies left, is working on transforming its entire strategy of struggle along the lines of unarmed civilian resistance. A recent Sahara Rise conference held in the refugee camps just outside the Moroccan-occupied territories and bringing together leaders from throughout the Saharian diaspora, evaluated their best potential for winning their hard-fought freedom. Nonviolence, in their case, is hoped to be the winning method for the liberation struggle, a hope tied up in international solidarity which we must provide. In Palestine, I guess that's 4, we are just beginning to see the positive effects of a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is shaking the Israeli apartheid regime with fear, but which remains the best unarmed strategy for bringing an end to conflict in the region. If the most militarized small state in the history of the world does not begin to see the folly of its continued ghettoized, armed to the teeth, oppressive, genocidal paradigm, the whole world will continue to suffer. 5. In Puerto Rico, that unique case of a U.S.-controlled territory with subjects both inside and outside of the empire, there is much to learn from the interlocking movements against the U.S. Navy presence in Vieques, for the freedom of Oscar Lopez Rivera and the political prisoners, and against the austerity measures Promesa and intensified U.S. economic control. Crossing deeply conflicting historic, ideological, tactical, and interpersonal lines, today's struggles are marked by strategic conversations between people of all political parties and from various status options regarding a decolonized future. This modern-day united front momentum is also unique, deserving of greater attention and support from those up north who barely know that Puerto Ricans can be conscripted into the U.S. Armed Forces, but are not allowed to vote in U.S. presidential elections. 6. In Cuba, a new president and new constitution are bringing great debate and controversy on all sides of the right-left spectrum. Whatever one's perspectives on communism or Fidel, however, the model of Cuba remains essentially important because it is a society based on the rational. In all of the Americas, and truthfully throughout the world, there is barely a nation-state with as consistent and clear educational policies designed to educate, to foster literacy, critical thinking, and lifelong learning. There is nary a healthcare system in the world structured as well to actually look after the health of its peoples and the peoples of other countries as well. 7. In Venezuela, an international eco-socialist movement is finding hope rooted in a relationship to Mother Earth that is neither exploitative nor divorced from a people-based human rights agenda. The practice of trueque, common especially in Afro-Venezuelan parts of the country, has built self-sufficiency and prosperity to villages that some would consider poor in the traditional sense. Trueque, without currency or money to get in the way, a system of bartering has empowered grassroots farmers and builders to trade food for services, to eat well, and have what they need to dream and create better futures. 8. In Mexico, the spreading of the Zapatista model of unarmed social transformation and the creation of liberated spaces has grown to include a new Mexico-wide Indigenous Peoples Assembly. The running of a presidential candidate which they expected and hoped would not win was an especially bold recent campaign. No representative of the people could withstand being in top office at a time of almost inevitable neoliberalism. The electoral campaign was not to win. It was all about education and widening conversations about the future so that a larger number of Mexican people would understand the work for a radical model of justice for all. What this campaign was about, in short, was organizing. And 9, finally, allow me to cite a more local example of hope. Though I have already spoken against the heinous magic tricks of the disappearance of land and rights, I am no opponent of magic in general. I'm especially intrigued by the black girl magic as it is being expressed in modern US-based youth movements, providing the backbone for the movement for Black lives, the more inclusive parts of the women's marches, and key components of the Poor People's Campaign. It's become an often unnamed and certainly underappreciated aspect of all the mass mobilizations of the past several years. And I'm honored to have here someone I consider very magical and thoughtful indeed, in the person of Judea Juju Holden. Their recent writings on Black femme organizing suggests that the heart of the contribution of this magic can bring in a society at a moment of history at the crossroads between fascism and the building of beloved communities. So long as one is open to change, one can never be, quote, disposable. They explain, quote, disposability is rooted in capitalism that is informed by white supremacy. There is a new generation that is grounding in disruption and agitation, close quote. If that is not a reason for hope, I don't know what is. Conclusion, defining issues and terms. Revolutionary nonviolence is an idea based in a dialectical understanding of the world. Apparent contradictions are seen as opportunities for greater clarity and more effective praxis. Alleged dichotomies are revealed false if they are fundamentally aligned towards the same basic goals and aspirations. The concept of revolution is not elevated beyond the significance of life itself, the sanctity and beauty of all living things, and our revolutionary charge to fill our lives and movement practice with love, love, love. The concept of nonviolence is never placed above and beyond the need for revolution, and understanding that total, transformational, radical shifts towards a planet in harmony with itself is absolutely required for survival and happiness. Capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteroorthodoxy, ageism, fundamentalism, these just don't have a part in it. And the debates about how best to reform the structures and institutions which oppress us are no longer as helpful as they used to be. Any and all tactics, like any and all tools, can be used improperly or used for progress. Reformist tools are just as needed as any other. No revolution has ever been made without hundreds of reforms along the way. But reform cannot be our fundamental goal, just as our methods cannot be our long-term means of achieving peace with justice. If we are to build a decolonized world, we must decolonize our minds and our practices. We must make repairs and reparations. We cannot use the master's tools, as Audre Lorde reminded us so long ago. We must dig deeper, learn our lessons well, and build anew. Thank you.